welcome back to yet another video. This week I'm going to be tackling another blanket dress to try and get rid of some of the hoard that I have above me here. And this week I'm going for a nice simple button-up dress, sort of inspired by this weird pastel jumper that existed back in the day. So without any further ado, let's get into it. For this project you'll need one Minnie Mouse bedsheet, this Burda 6520 pattern, assorted Mickey shaped buttons, and a 16-inch invisible zip. To start, I have to free the usable side of the blanket from the other side. Then I lay the pattern pieces on top and cut them out. I actually pay careful attention here to line up the pieces so that the Minnie is in the same position on the front and the back. Then I cut the sleeves and collar pieces from the colour block pieces on the other side of the blanket. Now that all the pattern pieces are cut out, let's get on to putting it together. The first thing I do is cut out and apply iron-on interfacing to the collar and facing pieces. Once that's done, I transfer any notches and landmarks to all of the pieces of fabric that require them. Then I sew up the darts on the front and back of the bodice. Once all of the darts are sewn, I then iron them nice and flat. Then I join the front and back pieces together at the shoulder seams. Onto the collar, so I sew the front and back pieces together. I then trim as close to the stitch line as possible to remove any of the bulk so that when I turn it right side out, it sits nice and flat and beautiful. Once the collar is turned right side out, it's time to attach it to the neckline of the bodice. Then I make the lower half of the collar and the facing pieces, which also get stitched to the front of the bodice and the neckline. After it's stitched in place, I then turn the facing to the inside of the bodice, and here's how it's looking so far. Next, I add 3 Mickey Mouse buttons to the front of the bodice. After using my machine to stitch the buttonholes, I then place a pin right in the top part of the buttonhole, and then I use my seam ripper to open up the buttonhole. And by doing this, it means I don't rip all the way through it because it catches on that pin. Right, so the next step in the dress is to sew the pockets into the skirt. This is the really sad and pathetic pocket that came with the skirt pattern. Right, I can barely get hand in there. What good is that for? This is the pocket that I put on everything else I make. Look at the difference. So we are definitely going to get rid of that one and do this one instead. I cut the pockets from some usable bits of white fabric on the bad side of the blanket, and then I stitched them into the sides of the skirt. Once each side of the skirt had a pocket sewn in, I then sewed the two sides together. With one side of the skirt sewn together, I then pleated along the top edge and then used a basting stitch to hold those pleats in place. So I'm not sure if you remembered earlier when I was cutting out the skirt pieces that the blanket itself wasn't actually quite wide enough to accommodate for the pattern piece, and silly me forgot that as I was doing the pleating of it just now. And look, aren't the pleats lovely? Didn't I get them perfect? Yes, I did. Look how much it doesn't fit, and that is because I forgot to accommodate for the smaller size of the blanket compared to the pattern piece. So I'm going to take out all of the pleats and I'm just going to gather it instead, and that way I can gather it to the size of the top and we don't have to worry about them being slightly too small. But I can't be bothered doing that right now. I'm going to save that for tomorrow. First thing I had to do was unpick the basting stitch, and then I trimmed the curved pleaty part off of the top edge of the skirt so that I had a 1.5 centimetre straight seam allowance. Then, using a long stitch length and a loose tension on my machine, I created 2 lines of gathering stitches. Then, holding these 2 threads in my hand and pulling slightly, I was able to gather the skirt to the length of the bottom of the bodice. Then I attached the skirt to the bodice and sewed it in place. Now that the skirt was attached to the bodice, I can sew in the invisible zip in one side and finally sew the side up. Zipper in, first dress try on. So first thing I want to point out is I made this dress to the measurements that were recommended to me on the back of the packet. I didn't do a mock-up first because the finished garment measurements that they gave me said that this would be quite roomy on me. I can't even get the top button done up, so do with that information what you will. And it's not zipping all the way up here, but that's honestly just because I have a t-shirt on underneath it and too much fabric. Yeah, other than that, it's very nice, very good. Perhaps I should go put some sleeves on it. The sleeves are easy enough to put together. You just sew the front pieces to the back pieces. And then I did a rolled 1 centimetre hem along the bottom edge of the sleeves to finish them. Then they were pinned into the sleeve hole and sewn in place. After the sleeves were on, all I had left to do was add a hem along the bottom edge of the dress. And just like that, it is finished. So there you have it. That is how I made, yet again, another blanket dress. I want to say I'm happy with this. I mean, overall, I'm happy with it. It's a dress. However, there are some glaring issues with this particular pattern. See if you can guess what the major one is. Biggest gripe I have with this pattern is 100% the fit of it. I followed the instructions as written on the back for my size, and according to the finished measurements provided to me, I should have had at least some ease in this dress, and as you can see, I can't even get that top button up. I should have had at least an inch of wiggle room there, and where it fits me at the waist, it is skin tight. There's about 1/4 of an inch of ease in there, and it shouldn't have been that tight. I should have had at least 1.5 inches according to the finished garment measurements. So keep that in mind if you want to recreate this dress yourself. Either do a mock-up or size it up, because as it is far too small. The second issue I have is the cap sleeves. They look really cool and they feel fine when you have your arms down, but as soon as you lift them up, they get really, really tight and they don't have a lot of give in them. That's just something to also keep in mind if you plan on, like, I don't know, doing this a lot. Finally, why is there only one pocket? Why don't we have a secondary pocket on this side? I know you can put pockets and zippers in on the same side, so that's just bizarre to me. I mean, I think I'd honestly prefer it just getting rid of that pocket at this point, so it's symmetrical. It just doesn't feel right. But other than that, the dress itself does look cool, and If I had sized it up, I think I would have absolutely loved this pattern. But with all that being said, if you like this video, please consider leaving a comment. If you really liked it, maybe even subscribe. I do a lot of sewing, crafting and fun related things here on this channel, and I usually try and upload every week or so. And with all that being said, I will see you next week. Goodbye!